Dr. Samuel Reed adjusted his glasses as he scanned the file in front of him. The latest subject, Daniel Holt, had checked into the Institute for Sleep Research 3 nights ago, suffering from chronic insomnia and vivid nightmares. The experimental treatment involved deep sleep stimulation, a method designed to enhance REM cycles through low-frequency brainwave induction. The project had shown promise in preliminary trials, but Daniel's case was unique. His insomnia had worsened over the past year, and none of the conventional treatments had helped. Dr. Reed glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m. It was time. "Are you ready, Daniel?" Dr. Reed asked, his voice calm yet clinical. He had conducted this experiment multiple times before, but something about tonight felt different. Daniel nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, I guess." His voice wavered, betraying the nervous energy beneath his composed exterior. He adjusted his position on the hospital-like bed in room 306, exhaling shakily. The sterile white walls, the constant beeping of monitors, and the scent of antiseptic made him uneasy. He had always hated hospitals. A nurse, Clara, approached with a clipboard. "Just relax, Mr. Holt. We'll monitor everything. If anything feels off, we'll be right here." Daniel gave a weak smile, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. His nightmares weren't just bad dreams. They felt real. Too real. He had woken up screaming on multiple occasions, drenched in sweat, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed him back from the dream world. Clara gently placed a set of electrodes on his temples, pressing them into place with careful precision. "All set. Dr. Reed, we're ready." Dr. Reed tapped a few commands into the terminal, and the overhead lights dimmed. A low-frequency hum filled the room as the sleep-inducing machine powered up, its rhythmic vibrations syncing with Daniel's brainwaves. "I need you to take slow, deep breaths," Dr. Reed instructed. "Let yourself drift." Daniel did as he was told. His eyelids felt heavier with each passing second. The room faded into a blur. The last thing he saw was Dr. Reed scribbling something in his notes, his face unreadable. As the sedation took full effect, Daniel's body relaxed completely. His heart rate slowed. His breathing became deep and even. The monitors registered stable readings, but then something changed. A flicker on the screen, a brief surge in brain activity, a spike that shouldn't have been there. Dr. Reed frowned, his fingers tightening around his pen. "That's unusual," he muttered. Clara leaned in. "What is it?" "His readings are off the charts. I've never seen brainwave activity like this before. It's as if he's entering a REM state faster than normal." The monitor beeped faster. Daniel's eyes darted beneath his eyelids, his fingers twitching. "Increase observation frequency," Dr. Reed ordered. "Let's see how deep he goes." Clara nodded, adjusting the settings on the machine. Inside Daniel's mind, something shifted. He felt like he was falling, faster, deeper, through an endless tunnel of darkness. Distant whispers echoed around him, voices he couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the falling stopped. He was standing in a room, but it wasn't room 306. It was a small apartment, dimly lit by the flickering glow of a neon sign outside the window. The hum of city traffic drifted in. A coffee table sat in front of him, covered in scattered papers and an empty whiskey glass. A framed photograph rested on the table. He picked it up. The picture showed a man and a woman smiling. The man looked familiar. Daniel's heart pounded as he traced his finger over the image. It was him, but not him. The woman in the photo. He had never seen her before in his life. Then, from behind him, a voice whispered, "James, you're home." A shrill alarm yanked Daniel from sleep. He gasped, disoriented, his skin clammy with sweat. But something was wrong. His surroundings felt unfamiliar. The walls were different. The window blinds were pulled up, revealing a cityscape he didn't recognize. He turned his head, expecting to see Dr. Reed or a nurse. Instead, a woman stood at the doorway. "James, are you okay?" she asked. Concern etched across her face. "James?" The name rang hollow in his ears. Who are you?" Daniel stammered. The woman's expression darkened. "James, stop messing around. It's me, Emily, your wife." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. No, my name is Daniel. Daniel Holt. Where am I?" Emily's face paled. "James, what are you talking about?" Her voice cracked as she backed away. "You're scaring me." Daniel stumbled out of bed. He wasn't in the sleep lab anymore. The beeping monitors were gone. The sterile white walls replaced with warm beige tones. A ceiling fan whirred softly above. Framed pictures lined the nightstand. Photos of a smiling man, James, posing with Emily. He grabbed one and stared. The man in the picture looked familiar, but wasn't him. The panic hit like a punch to the gut. Daniel dropped the frame. It crashed onto the floor, shattering into shards. Emily gasped, taking a step toward him. "James, what's wrong with you?" Daniel shook his head furiously. "I don't know who James is. I swear to you, I'm not him." His voice cracked with desperation. He could feel his chest tightening, his breath coming in ragged bursts. It felt like the walls were closing in. Emily's hands trembled. "James, please. You had a rough day yesterday. Maybe your head isn't right. Stop calling me James." Daniel snapped, backing away toward the bedroom door. His heart pounded. He needed to get out, to escape this nightmare. But where would he go? He didn't even know what city he was in. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You're acting crazy. Maybe you need a doctor." Daniel shook his head. No hospitals. He needed answers. He turned and bolted down the hallway. The walls blurred past him as he stumbled into the living room. A couch, a coffee table, more framed, pictures, more proof of a life that wasn't his. He reached the front door and yanked it open. Cold night air blasted his face. A street stretched before him. Cars passing in the distance. Neon lights flickering from a bar across the road. Then, a voice behind him. "James, where are you going?" Daniel spun around. At the top of the stairs stood a child. A little girl, no, older than 6. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Her blue eyes filled with worry. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. He didn't know her, but deep in his mind, a name surfaced. Lily, and he had no idea why. A stranger. In the mirror, Daniel bolted from the bed, stumbling into a bathroom. His breath came in sharp, rapid bursts. He flicked on the light, and his stomach lurched. The face staring back at him was not his own. His reflection showed a man in his late 30s, strong jawline, short black hair, a scar across his left eyebrow. But it wasn't Daniel. He staggered back, nearly slipping on the tiled floor. His hands trembled as he reached up, fingers grazing the unfamiliar contours of his face. The skin was rougher than he remembered. His nose was slightly crooked. His eyes a deeper shade of brown than they should have been. Every detail screamed that he was someone else. No. This isn't real, he whispered, shaking his head violently. Emily's voice broke the trance. James, you need to sit down. Maybe it's a migraine. Daniel spun to face her, his pulse hammering in his ears. No, I don't know you. I don't know where I am. His voice cracked, rising with panic. Emily's face paled. James, please, whatever this is, we'll fix it. I promise. Just sit down. I'll get you some water. Daniel's gaze darted back to the mirror. The stranger's wide, terrified eyes mirrored his own emotions. He leaned closer, desperate to find any trace of himself in the reflection. But there was none. A sharp pain exploded behind his eyes. He clutched his head, groaning as images flooded his mind. Memories that weren't his. A childhood home. A Christmas morning spent unwrapping gifts beside a roaring fireplace. A wedding day, standing at the altar. Emily beaming in her white dress. The birth of a child. A little girl, Lily, reaching for his hand. But they weren't his memories. They belonged to James. Daniel gasped, stumbling backward. The walls of the bathroom seemed to pulse around him, bending, warping, as if reality itself was twisting out of shape. No, he choked out. This isn't real. I'm not him. Emily took a hesitant step toward him, tears brimming in her eyes. James, you're scaring me. Maybe we should call someone. A doctor. Stop calling me that, Daniel shouted. He rushed past her, barreling down the hallway. His legs felt unsteady, as if they didn't belong to him. He reached the living room and gripped the back of a chair, his head still throbbing. His gaze darted around the room. More photographs, more proof of a life he didn't recognize. He had to get out. He had to find help. Suddenly, the landline phone on the wall rang. The sound sliced through the tense silence. Emily flinched, but hurried over to answer it. Hello? Her voice was shaky. A pause. Then, Emily's eyes widened. She turned slowly to face Daniel, the color draining from her face. It's for you. Daniel hesitated. For me? He barely knew where he was, let alone why someone would call him. Emily held the phone out to him, her hand trembling. They said they've been waiting for your call. Daniel swallowed hard. Every instinct told him not to take it, but his hand moved anyway, almost involuntarily. He pressed the receiver to his ear. Hello? A low, distorted voice crackled through the line. James, we need to talk. Daniel's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The line went dead. Flashes of another life stormed his mind. A childhood home he had never seen. He could hear the echo of laughter, feel the warmth of a mother's embrace. But it wasn't his mother. The scent of fresh baked cookies drifted through the air, mixing with the subtle aroma of cinnamon and coffee. He saw tiny fingers wrapping around his own. His, yet not his. The memories shifted. A wedding day. A vision of Emily standing at the altar, her white dress flowing like mist. The weight of a ring on his finger. The whispered "I do." The press of her lips against his. The sensation of absolute certainty. Of love, but none of it belonged to him. Then came the pain. The image of a child. A little girl with golden curls and wide blue eyes. He could feel the memory of lifting her in his arms. The way she giggled when he spun her around. He knew her name, Lily. It came to him as naturally as breathing. The sound of her voice, the warmth of her tiny hand gripping his, was seared into his mind. But the memory turned dark. A hospital room, the beeping of a heart monitor, a hand turning cold in his grasp. The moment he realized he would never hear that laugh again, Daniel gasped, clutching his head as if he could force the foreign memories out. "No," he muttered. "This isn't real. This never happened." But it felt real. Too real. His pulse hammered against his skull. The weight of grief pressing on his chest. His knees buckled, and he staggered against the hallway wall. He was suffocating under the weight of a sorrow that didn't belong to him. He had never been married. He had never lost a child. Then why does it hurt so much? Emily reached for him again, her voice desperate. "James, please." Daniel yanked away violently, breathing hard. "I don't know you. I don't know who the hell James is." She flinched, tears streaming down her face. But Daniel wasn't thinking about her anymore. He had to get out, find Dr. Reed, find answers, find himself. His feet moved before he could think. He sprinted down the hallway, past family portraits, pictures of him and Emily, of their life together, of moments that should have meant something, but were utterly foreign to him. He reached the front door and yanked it open, stepping into the street, only to freeze. The neighborhood stretched before him, unfamiliar, impossibly real. The air smelled crisp, the pavement slightly damp from recent rain. A car drove by, its headlights cutting through the twilight, momentarily blinding him. He turned in slow circles, his breath coming in shallow gasps. No hospital, no sleep lab, no exit. He was trapped. His mind raced, trying to piece together the impossible puzzle. He wasn't in a dream. The cool night air, the distant sound of a dog barking, the distant neon flicker of a gas station sign. This wasn't some fevered hallucination. He took a hesitant step forward, scanning his surroundings. The houses looked normal, identical suburban homes with neatly trimmed lawns and parked cars lining the driveways. The scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with the distant aroma of grilled food. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Normal, everyday life happening all around him, as if he belonged here, but he didn't. Daniel turned back toward the house. Emily, still standing in the doorway, her hands clasped together like she was praying. Her lips moved, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. His head buzzed with static. Then the whisper came, "Go back." Daniel's blood turned to ice. The voice had come from inside his own mind, quiet but insistent, as if someone, was lurking just beneath the surface of his consciousness. He took a step back, His legs felt heavy, as though the air had thickened around him. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "Go back, James." "No," he whispered. "I'm not James." The whisper didn't stop. It coiled around his thoughts like a serpent, wrapping tighter with each passing second. He clutched his head, trying to drown it out. The world around him blurred, the streetlights flickering erratically. Then he saw movement. Across the street, standing perfectly still beneath a flickering street lamp, was a figure. It wasn't a person. Not really. It was a shadow, darker than the night itself, its edges shifting unnaturally, as if it wasn't bound to the rules of reality. No eyes, no face, just a hollow, empty form. But Daniel could feel it watching him. He took a shaky step backward. The shadow moved forward. Daniel turned and bolted. His feet pounded against the pavement as he ran, blind with panic. He didn't know where he was going. He just had to get away. The houses blurred past him, the street stretching endlessly in all directions. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to flee. Then suddenly, he stumbled. The world tilted violently as he crashed onto the pavement. His palms scraped against the rough asphalt, pain jolting up his arms. He groaned, trying to push himself up. A shadow loomed over him. His breath hitched. Back at the sleep lab, chaos erupted. Dr. Reed leaned forward, his grip tightening on the edge of the console as Daniel's body convulsed violently on the bed. The monitors flashed erratic signals, brainwaves spiking, heart rate accelerating, body temperature rising. "He's going into distress," a nurse shouted, frantically adjusting the IV drip. "His vitals are all over the place." Dr. Reed's eyes flicked between the screens. This wasn't normal. The brain activity should have stabilized by now. Yet the data suggested something impossible. An overlay of consciousnesses. Two distinct neural patterns fighting for control. "Doctor, this is impossible," another nurse gasped. "It's like someone else is in there with him." Dr. Reed's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a neural anomaly. This was a full-blown possession of identity. But by what? Daniel's body thrashed again, the force of his convulsions nearly throwing him off the bed. The straps meant to keep him in place strained under his movements. "Increase the sedative," Reed barked. "We need to stabilize him before—" The machines let out a shrill beep. The heart monitor flatlined. A collective gasp filled the room. "No, no, no," Reed muttered under his breath. His hands flew to the defibrillator, charging it. The nurses scrambled to clear the area. "Come on, Daniel, stay with me." He pressed the paddles against Daniel's chest. Clear. A jolt of electricity surged through Daniel's body, making his limbs jerk. The monitor flickered. A faint blip. "Again," Reed shouted. "Clear." Another shock. The monitor beeped erratically before stabilizing. A sigh of relief washed through the team. But it was short-lived. On the monitor, Daniel's identity signature flickered. His brain activity no longer resembled a single person's. The lines pulsed, erratic and fragmented. "Doctor, look at this," a nurse whispered, pointing at the EEG scan. The brainwaves no longer looked human. Reed's breath hitched. The patterns were shifting, morphing, breaking apart and reforming like static, trying to settle into a signal. But it wasn't Daniel. It wasn't James. "What the hell is this?" Reed murmured. "Is he waking up?" one of the nurses asked, voice trembling. But Daniel, James, was already gone, and something else had taken his place. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the street, his breath ragged, his hands still shaking. The shadow had disappeared, but the echo of its presence remained, lingering like a weight pressing against his chest. Emily stood in the doorway, terror etched across her face. "James, please come inside." The words felt distant, as if spoken through a layer of thick glass. Daniel barely heard her. The only thing he could focus on was the ringing in his ears, the way the world around him seemed to warp and twist. Then he heard it again. The whisper, "Go back." It wasn't coming from inside his head this time. It was outside, nearby. Daniel's eyes darted around, scanning the street. The houses looked the same, silent, normal, eerily untouched. But something was wrong. Then, in the distance, a single street lamp flickered, and beneath it stood a figure. Not a shadow, not a hallucination. A man, dressed in black, his face obscured by the dim light. The figure stood unnaturally still. He was watching. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He turned to Emily. "Who is that?" She followed his gaze, then frowned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel's skin prickled. She couldn't see him. A wave of cold swept over him. The figure lifted a hand, beckoning him, and Daniel felt his legs move on their own. He stepped forward, unable to resist. The world around him dimmed, as though the streetlights were being swallowed by the dark. His breath fogged in front of him. His fingers tingled, numbing with each step closer. The man in black remained still, waiting. Then, just as Daniel reached the flickering street lamp, the figure finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here." His voice wasn't normal. It was layered, as though multiple voices were speaking at once. Some low, some high, all whispering in unison. Daniel's pulse hammered. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head. "The real question is, who are you?" Daniel's breath hitched. The world around him trembled. Then everything went black. In the lab, Daniel's eyes shot open. His body jerked upright, gasping, as though surfacing from drowning waters. The machines blared alarms. The nurses jumped back. Reed took an involuntary step closer, gripping the console. "Daniel," he called out. "Can you hear me?" Daniel's head turned slowly, unnaturally, as if adjusting to his own body for the first time. Then he smiled, and Reed knew in that moment that the man sitting in front of him was no longer Daniel Holt. Something else had come back instead. Daniel, now trapped in James's body, searched for answers. Panic burned through his veins as he scoured the house, his fingers trembling as he rifled through drawers, cabinets, and shelves. He needed something, anything that would explain what had happened to him. In the dim glow of a bedside lamp, he found documents with James's name printed neatly on official papers. Bank statements, insurance records, a driver's license, all evidence of a life that was not his. No trace of Daniel Holt. It was as if he had never existed. His own name, his own history, had been erased. His breath came faster, a rising panic clawing at his throat. He grabbed a photo album from the shelf and flipped through it. Page after page showed James, his own unfamiliar face, laughing with Emily, holding Lily, celebrating birthdays, posing with friends he had never met. It was an entire lifetime, complete with love, loss, and memories that should have meant something, but to him, they were as foreign as a stranger's diary. Daniel slammed the album shut and stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The crash made him flinch, but he barely registered it. His head pounded, his vision blurred. His very existence was slipping through his fingers. Then, on the nightstand, he spotted a crumpled envelope. His fingers twitched as he reached for it, James's handwriting. His heart pounded as he unfolded the paper and read the chilling message. If you wake up as me, it means they failed to stop it. Find Dr. Reed. Trust no one. The words sent a shiver down his spine. His hands tightened around the letter. They failed to stop it. What did that mean? Who had tried to stop it? And what exactly had happened to him? His mind raced. James had known. Somehow, he had expected this. The message was a warning, a desperate plea left behind for whoever ended up in his body. For Daniel, he exhaled shakily, his pulse hammering in his ears. This wasn't just a random experiment gone wrong. Someone had done this to him, and whoever was responsible had ensured that there was no way back. A noise outside broke his thoughts. Shadow moved past the window. Daniel froze, his entire body going rigid. Someone was watching him. He crept toward the window and peered out through a sliver in the curtains. A dark figure stood at the edge of the driveway, not moving, not blinking, just watching. His heart pounded against his ribs. He took a slow, careful step back. Trust no one. The front door creaked. Daniel whipped around, his breath catching in his throat. Footsteps. Someone was inside the house. He needed to move. Now, spinning on his heel, he bolted for the back door. His fingers fumbled with the lock, adrenaline spiking as he yanked it open and stumbled into the cold night air. The backyard stretched into darkness, the trees swaying slightly in the wind. He didn't have time to think. He just ran. His feet pounded against the damp grass, breath ragged as he sprinted toward the street. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. Whoever had done this to him wasn't finished. His mind reeled with questions. How had James known? What had he meant by they failed to stop it? And most terrifying of all, if he was in James's body, then where was James? Then, just as he turned the corner, his foot caught on something. He tripped, crashing onto the pavement, pain jolting through his body. And then, a voice, going somewhere. Daniel barely had time to react before a hand clamped down on his wrist, yanking him up with inhuman strength. A man stood over him, not the shadowed figure from the street lamp. Someone else, a stranger with piercing gray eyes, dressed in a sleek black coat. His expression was unreadable, his grip like iron. Daniel struggled. Let me go. The man didn't flinch. His grip tightened. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Daniel's breath came in short, frantic bursts. Who are you? What is this? The man exhaled sharply, almost amused. You're asking the wrong questions. You should be asking, how much time do you have left? A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Then, without warning, the man released him and took a step back. "Run if you want. It won't matter. They're already coming." Daniel's pulse raced. He didn't wait to find out who they were. He ran. Again. He had to find Dr. Reed. He had to find answers. Because one terrifying thought kept repeating in his mind. This wasn't just about him. Something much bigger was happening. Daniel had to find Reed. He had to return. The cold night air bit at his skin as he sprinted through the empty streets. His breath ragged, his legs burned. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. His mind raced alongside his footsteps, piecing together the impossible puzzle that had become his reality. But then, just as he reached the next street corner, he stopped dead in his tracks. A shadowed figure was waiting. Daniel's chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. The man in black stood beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, hands in his coat pockets, his face obscured by the shadows. "James," the man said, his voice calm, deliberate. Daniel hesitated, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Who are you?" The man smirked. "You already know." Daniel felt his body stiffen, an invisible force pressing against him. His head throbbed as though something inside his mind was trying to break free. He staggered back a step, gripping his temples. A burning sensation spread through his skull. Sharp, relentless. "Stop!" Daniel gasped, his vision blurring. The man took a step closer. "You weren't supposed to wake up like this. They were supposed to finish the transfer before you became aware. But now," he tilted his head slightly, "you've complicated things." Daniel's heart pounded harder. "Transfer? What are you talking about?" "You don't belong here," the man said simply. "You never did." A searing pain shot through Daniel's head, forcing him to his knees. He clutched his skull as flashes of distorted images flickered behind his eyelids. James's memories, his own memories, something else entirely. Faces he didn't recognize, places he had never been, voices whispering in languages he had never spoken. The man in black crouched beside him, his expression unreadable. "Your body is gone, Daniel. You understand that now, don't you? This body, James's body, is all you have left, and even that is temporary." Daniel's breathing grew shallow. "No, that's not true. I can go back. I just have to find Dr. Reed. He can fix this." The man let out a quiet chuckle. "Dr. Reed, you think he can help you? You think he wasn't part of this from the beginning?" He stood and dusted off his coat. "You're a fragment, Daniel. A lost thought in a body that doesn't belong to you. And they're coming to correct the mistake." A gust of wind blew through the street, carrying an eerie silence in its wake. Daniel's vision swam, darkness creeping into the edges of his mind. Back at the sleep lab, alarms blared. Dr. Reed stood frozen, staring at the monitor as Daniel's original body convulsed violently before going still. The brainwave readings on the screen fluctuated erratically, as if something or someone was still fighting to hold on. Then, the flatline. The room fell silent. A nurse covered her mouth. "Doctor, he's gone." Dr. Reed exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "No," he murmured. "Not gone. Just displaced." The other researchers exchanged uneasy glances. Should we call it? One of them asked, hesitantly checking the clock. Time of death? Reed remained silent for a long moment. His fingers drummed against the console as he stared at the screen, where Daniel's neural pattern had vanished. The man they had known as Daniel Holt no longer existed, or at least not in any way they could measure. Finally, Reed straightened and turned toward the exit, his voice quiet but firm. Shut it down. Erase the records. No one needs to know about this. The team hesitated, but one by one, they followed his orders. Screens went dark. Files were deleted. The last remnants of Daniel Holt's existence were wiped clean. Dr. Reed cast one final glance at the lifeless body on the table before stepping out of the lab. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It's done, he said into the receiver. But there's a problem. He's still out there, and he knows. A pause, then a distorted voice responded from the other end. Then we find him, and we finish what we started. Daniel's eyes fluttered open. He was lying on a cold, concrete floor. His body ached, his mind foggy, like waking from a nightmare that refused to end. He blinked, forcing his vision to focus. His surroundings were unfamiliar. An empty warehouse, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. The air smelled of dust and damp metal. His head throbbed, the remnants of his last memory flickering like static in his brain. He wasn't dead, but something was different. Something had changed. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Daniel pushed himself upright, his muscles sluggish, his balance unsteady. He wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not the man in black. Someone else. Daniel's breath hitched as he got his first clear look at the newcomer. It was him, or at least, someone who looked exactly like him. The other, Daniel smirked. Took you long enough to wake up? Daniel staggered back. No, that's not possible. The other, him shrugged. Yeah, well, possible or not, here we are.